What made me fall in love with the Hunter Valley are the very uniquely regional styles that we produce here. It's very much about Semillon and Shiraz. Semillon is unique to the world, but also our style of Shiraz is quite unique to the Hunter Valley as well. If you haven't tried any Hunter Valley wines for a while, go and seek them out, because I think you might be pleasantly surprised with what you see.
Today we've got a very special episode. We're here with internationally acclaimed winemaker Andrew Thomas from Thomas Wines. I'm Jason.
And I'm Trent, and we're here on an unapologetically unprofessional, unfiltered wine journey. And we were saying here, Jace.
Our saying is drink more, try more, learn more. And don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, boys.
We're at your site here, and we've got a beautiful set of wines to taste. We're going to talk about your wine journey. We're going to talk about Thomas Wines. Before we get into that, we always like to ask a few icebreaker questions. Yep. So I might hand over to Trent.
Okay, first one, Andrew. Most memorable wine you've tasted could be the wine, or could be a memorable moment that you had with a wine.
Right. Well, you kind of put me on the spot, but there's plenty.
Yeah.
Look, I think if I had to name one wine, it would probably be the 1978 DRC Latache, which is, as we know, an exceptional label from an exceptional part of Burgundy from an exceptional year. There's been plenty along the way, but that's one that just springs to mind straight away.
Where did you have that?
Geez, I don't even remember. It was a long time ago. If you could get your hands on a bottle of that wine now, you would be like jumping for joy, because I'd say they would be very rare, and I can say with a certain degree of assurity that they'll also be very, very expensive.
Yeah. Was there certain kind of feelings or thoughts that kind of went through your mind when you tasted it? Did you say this is special?
Look, I went into it with a preconceived idea of what I was going to be tasting was going to be pretty exceptional. Yeah. And it was, and it screamed of, absolute top-end premium Burgundy. It was, look, I'm going to say it was a fair while ago. It was probably 20 years ago, but the wine was, probably 20 years old at the time I tasted it. And so it obviously, had, secondary, tertiary, bottle-aged characters that were still so fresh, so bright. Wow. And, it was plain to see why people crave DRC all over the world, because it's just fantastic.
Fantastic. No other bottle since then? No other DRC since then?
Oh, no, I've had plenty along the line. Yeah, I've been fortunate to have probably more than my fair share of DRC. Yeah. Not as many as some of that live around this valley, but, there's one thing about the Hunter Valley. I think it's probably if the people in Burgundy had a little map of the world and had little pins of where their wine's been drunk, there would be a fairly significant pin stuck in the Hunter Valley region in New South Wales, Australia, because we do drink probably more than our fair share of top shelf Burgundy.
You drink well.
We do.
Next wine. Is there still a wine that you haven't had a chance to drink yet that you still want to drink?
Yes. That'd be my 2025 vintage Hunter Valley Shiraz and Semillon.
Yeah.
It's funny, when in the wine industry, everyone in the wine industry has a level of passion for wine, and I'm sure a lot of people think that we drink a lot of our own wine, but in truth be known, we don't really. Don't get me wrong, we drink a bit of our wine, and it's good to drink some of your own wine at home. You take yourself out of the, the sort of almost at a clinical environment that we have here in the wine room when we're doing our tastings on the bench, and to take yourself out of that environment and enjoy your own wines with a meal, that sort of thing. It's, it really puts what you're doing into context. But, it's, we drink a bit, they're kind of handy and they feel like they're free. Yeah. But we drink wine from all over the world, and we're obviously interested in wine, and anything that's good, we have an interest in. So, I've been very fortunate to have tasted and drunk some of the great wines across the world over all the years. One thing I clearly haven't tasted yet, and it's really interesting to me, is what next year's vintage is going to be like.
Is it as exciting every single year, though, the new vintage?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's obviously the time of year, the harvest, the vintage period is the busiest, most frantic time of the year, but it's that short period of time where almost every decision you make will have a bearing on the quality of the wines that you have to offer your customers over the next year to 10 years' time. So it's really critical you get things right. It's tiring, but it's also very exciting. The adrenaline's pumping because it's the new harvest. And it's look, we have a pretty good idea of what's in store because the growing season leading up to harvest gives us a pretty good idea of where we're sitting in comparison to previous years. But it's not until you get the fruit safely off the vine and into the winery, it's not until then that you really know exactly what you've got. Yeah. And that's very exciting.
Next question. A person past or present they would love to have a bottle of wine with.
Can I give you two?
Yes, definitely.
Both from the past.
Yes.
First one would be Maurice O'Shea. One of the legendary pioneers of the Australian wine industry and obviously a legend of the Hunter Valley. A lot of what we do today, a lot of the success of the Hunter Valley today can be attributed back to some of the things that Maurice O'Shea did back in those days. And the other one who unfortunately is not with us any longer, is Murray Tyrrell, another legend of the Hunter Valley wine industry. And I was very fortunate to work under Murray for my 13 years at Tyrrell's. I think he passed away in the year 2000 maybe, so 25 years ago. But I would just love to have to pull out a glass of my wine and sit down and see what Murray, the boss we used to call him, thinks of how we're going.
Wow. Sounds special. Next one, favourite grape varietal.
Oh, that's hard. It's kind of like choosing your favourite child. Of course I have one.
Yes.
But I don't disclose
You're not meant to say that on air.
Look, if I've got to pick one, I'm going to say Semillon.
Semillon.
And, that's kind of puts Shiraz to one side, I guess. But the thing with Semillon, unlike Shiraz, which has grown pretty well everywhere across this country, particularly is, the Hunter Valley is really the spiritual home of Semillon in the world of wine. It's something that's very unique. Our style is very unique and its capacity to age quite gracefully for a very long time is very unique to the Hunter Valley. And that's something that we as winemakers, producers in the Hunter Valley are very proud of, that we have this thing that is so unique to this place.
We'll probably delve into that a bit later, but I'll ask the next question. When I think about wine, I also think about food. Is there a unique kind of food and wine pairing that you've come across that you want to share with us?
Again, let's focus on Hunter Sam.
Yeah.
The style of our Semillon, unwooded. It's all about freshness, vibrancy, varietal purity. Just as importantly to our style is that beautiful line of acidity that these wines have, and I think it's that lovely delicacy and purity and that acidity that makes Hunter Semillon so particularly suited to fresh, delicate seafood. So whilst unfortunately I'm not a shellfish eater, but think like freshly shucked oysters, bucket of prawns. One thing I don't do seafood with legs or houses, so shellfish, but I love scales and tails. So sashimi, pan fried whiting fillets, all those white flesh, beautiful, delicate, fresh seafood dishes. Semillon is just an absolute perfect match.
Is there also a pairing for aged Semillon as well?
Yeah, I think if you love oysters, young Hunter Semillon is perfect. In fact, anything you think about putting a little squeeze of lemon over is perfect for young Hunter Semillon. We're going to taste some Sem with a bit of bottle age in a little while, but clearly they develop a little more sort of flesh and complexity and richness around that core of acidity. So they're still very well matched to seafood, but they can handle slightly richer dishes. So perhaps a heavier sauce or something like with a baked snapper or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
sounds good. Last one, piece of advice for amateurs entering the wine journey.
Wow, as in winemaking or just
winemaking, learning about wine.
Look, the only and you guys have nailed it. The only way that you really get to understand wine is by tasting.
Yeah.
And the more you taste, the more your rubber, your memory will be able to recall something you've tasted before, and to be able to attribute it to a variety or a region or even a vintage. The more you taste, You can't expect to have a magnificent wine palate from the day dot. You've just got to have that experience, and the more you taste, the longer you taste for, the more high level of interest you take in what you're tasting, the more you concentrate on what you're tasting, the better you'll become in not just be able to identify things in wines, but to an extent, the higher level of enjoyment in tasting and drinking your wines as well.
Yeah, I think that's been a common theme, the kind of drink less but drink better, and also kind of think more about the wines.
Yeah. And you don't want to get too, you want to be able to enjoy it. So, don't take the whole thing too seriously. One of I think my Instagram thing says, Shiraz about wine without taking wine too seriously.
Yes.
It's important that you don't become wine wanker.
Yeah.
You enjoy it. And how far you delve in is a personal choice, but at the end of the day, you've got to enjoy it, or it defeats the purpose of the exercise.
I think one of the traps we fall into is trying to over-intellectualize wine.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's just a drink.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Very enjoyable drink, but it's just a drink at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And it brings people together, which is great.
That's the questions.
That's the warm-up.
Excellent.
That's the
Did I pass?
Flying colours.
We keep going.
We keep going. And so we do want to touch on your wine journey. And I had two questions I wanted to ask. Firstly, about how it started. I think as a consumer thinking about the wine industry, I always think there's a romantic idea of how people get into the industry, like they've tasted a fantastic wine and then they've said, this is where I want to go. I'm not sure if that's the case for everyone. How did your passion and interest to start in the wine industry commence?
So despite the fact we're sitting here in the Hunter Valley, I grew up in South Australia. So my father was, unfortunately, he's not with us anymore, but he was a veteran winemaker in McLaren Vale before he passed away in 2007. So my two sisters and I, we grew up, I guess, running around the vineyards and the winery. And, when you're a kid, it's not particularly that interesting because it's just what mum and dad do.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what mum and dad do. It's like not very interesting to a kid. So when I got to the sort of age towards the end of high school of like seriously thinking about what I was going to do with my life, I started thinking a bit more serious about the wine industry. I kind of knew it. I grew up in McLaren Vale. It's a beautiful region. And so I decided to enroll in Roseworthy, which is back in those days, it's at Adelaide Uni now where you study winemaking. I deferred for a year to work in another McLaren Vale winery just to make sure that it's what I wanted to do. And of course, the rest is history. Yep, that's good. So I did my Roseworthy degree and fortunately, in my final year at Roseworthy, I was offered a position as an assistant winemaker up here in the Hunter Valley at Tyrrell's. And, I figured that would be a great start to my career. Tyrrell's fantastic company back then, as they are still here today. So I moved to the Hunter Valley, knew nothing about Hunter Valley wines really. But over the next, what turned out to be 13 years, the Tyrrell family, who I'm still very close with, really instilled a passion for Hunter Valley wines. They taught me not only what makes the best of the Hunter Valley wines absolutely world class, but they showed me wines from all over the world that were world class and really elevated my appreciation for premium wines. I guess long-term plans for the Hunter Valley. In fact, I think I recall thinking probably after 3-4 years I'd head back to South Australia somewhere, but I just I just fell in love with the Hunter Valley and the very unique regional styles we make here. So after 13 years working at Tyrrell's, I just began sort of toying with the idea of exploring the opportunities of doing something with my own brand, which I actually started in the last couple of years while I was at Tyrrell's in my sort of spare time, early, late weekends, that sort of thing. Made a very, very tiny quantity of wine in a mate's winery. And a couple of years later, I decided, it's time to go with this. So I finished up with Tyrrell's and started Thomas Wines, I guess in earnest, in the year 2000. So we've actually I just worked this out halfway through vintage. We've just harvested our 25th vintage from the Braemore vineyard this year in 24.
And that kind of leads to my second question, because over that journey, you must have picked up a couple of tips and insights about how to make great wine, whether that could be learning from your father, your time at Tyrrell's, overseas. Are there like a couple of tips that you've picked up where you've gone, if I do this, I'm going to produce great wine, that you could share?
Yes, and I think this is probably a fairly standard response you'll get from a lot of winemakers. You've got to respect the vineyard. At the end of the day, we cannot do what we do here with all of the wines we produce under our own label without having access to some of the best quality fruit in the region. It's like a three-hatted restaurant. The chef is at the helm there, but they can't do what they can't present the dishes that they do without having access to the freshest, most premium quality ingredients. And it's the same with winemaking. You can't make a silk purse from a sow's ear. It's you cannot make great wine from ordinary fruit. Yeah. You can make ordinary wine from great fruit if you don't know what you're doing, and that's where the winemaking skill comes in. And it's a bit like the chef. The chef puts their own sort of flair on the ingredients to present the dish to the table. But at the end of the day, if you want to quantify it, I would say that 80% of the quality of this wine or any wine that we put out, and certainly in the premium end, 80% of it comes from the vineyard. It's just the last 20% that we apply our own sort of house style and our own sort of winemaking techniques to turn that premium quality fruit into the premium quality Thomas wines that we then pass on to our fans and our customers.
Yeah. Even with that though, like, is that something that you've learned, like, what is premium fruit? What does that taste like? What does that look like? And also the other thing is looking at the potential as well, because obviously you plant vines or you look at something that maybe not at its highest potential and something that you want to see kind of prevail in the next 5 or 10 years. How do you do that?
Yeah, look, it's obviously difficult when you're planting a vineyard because you're sort of delving into the unknown. But there's markers that can point you in the right direction. Yeah. So, for example, I'm fortunate to work with a lot of relatively old vineyards that have been in the ground a lot longer than I've been here in the Hunter Valley. But for example, let's talk about soils in the Hunter Valley, and it's a bit of a generalisation, but generally speaking, the whites and particularly Semillons, the more sort of classically shaped Hunter Sems, are grown on the lower lying sandy loam alluvial flats. Braemore, for example, is this ancient watercourse that's just on the other side of Hermitage Road here. The reds, on the other hand, on the darker, heavier soils. So it makes sense if you're going to plant a vineyard to plant it on the soils that are most suited for that particular variety. So there's that sort of thing. With the older vines, you obviously have some history on your side because you've seen what these vineyards have done in the past. I will say, with vineyards, there is this understanding that old vines produce the best wines. And there is an element of truth in that because it does take quite a few years for vineyards to settle down. Young vineyards tend to, they yield much higher crop levels than more mature vineyards that have the roots have dispersed into the soil where they need to go. You've got the balance, the canopy just right, and the fruit. The vine is comfortable, it's mature, and it will yield a more reasonable quality related crop level. Having said that, I'm a great believer that the reason that some of the old vines produce great wines is not necessarily because they're old vines, it's because they haven't been pulled out. And the reason they haven't been pulled out is because they made great wine as a young vineyard as well. So if what I'm trying to say makes sense, old vines just make great wines because they're still there. Yeah. The vineyards that perhaps weren't producing the quality, and this all comes back to your experimentation thing, the young vines that aren't producing the quality that you expect, they get pulled out and something else gets planted. But the ones that are still there now as old vines, I can almost certainly say that they showed a great deal of promise even as young vines. They just need to settle down.
Makes sense.
And then, sorry, just to finish off with your question, you can kind of tell when you're walking through a vineyard. It's obviously you know how old the vines are, but just walking through any vineyard, you get a feel for the balance of the canopy to the crop level, the way that the trellis is laid out, where the fruits hang on the vine, the health of the vineyard, and then of course tasting the fruit. And it can be a little difficult to relate the taste of a berry straight through to the end result in the bottle, but the best quality fruit just has that extra level of intensity and concentration, even on the vine at the fruit stage.
Yeah. So for the case of Braemore, did you know right from the get-go that it was going to be a good one?
You know what? I know, but I guess the reason that I first went to that vineyard, and I didn't own it back in those days, I went to go and see Ken Bray, who was the owner, but I know vineyards along that ancient watercourse that we're talking about. So Tyrrell's HVD is literally just across the road here, and I've spent a long time in Tyrrell, so I knew the potential of Semillon from this strip. I like to think this Heritage Road strip is kind of one of the Grand Cru strips of soil in the Hunter for Semillon. So I knew Ken potentially had some fruit available for a young aspiring winemaker like myself. So I went to see him, and as it turned out, he did, and that's where it all started from. And that was just a hunch that this vineyard could potentially produce something quite special. Yeah.
And what a hunch that was.
We might try and mix it up here and maybe taste a wine, and then we'll ask more questions and then go through it. So we might start off with the first one here, which I'll hold onto the screen, the 6 Degrees Semillon 2023. Did you just want to talk through the story of this one and any key tasting notes?
Sure. So obviously our focus is very much on the signature varieties of the Hunter Valley. So I've just selected today 3 different Semillons from our range. Clearly, when you're focusing on just 2, but let's talk Semillon here. When you're focusing on a single variety, it's really important to really showcase that stylistic diversity that you can achieve within a single variety. So, the 6 Degrees Semillon we're starting on here. This is quite a left field style for Hunter Semillon in that it's our off dry Hunter Sem. Just going back to drinking wines from around the world, one of the styles I love are those off-dry Germanic Rieslings from the Mosel, and that sort of cabinet level of residual sweetness. And I guess those wines were the inspiration for producing this wine. My first vintage of this was 2008. And looking back now, I think it's probably the first time that anyone had a serious attempt at producing a quality sweet Semillon from the Hunter Valley. Of course, we can go back to the Benin days, but they were like sugary, like soda pop sort of things. But this wine was always from the outset designed to be a slightly more serious attempt at an off-dry Hunter Sem. And look, I guess the key to this style, regardless of whether it's Germanic Riesling or Hunter Semillon, is that balance that exists between the residual sweetness and that elevated lime acidity. Yeah. So despite the bitter sweetness, which everyone gets and loves, the acidity cuts through and it still finishes crisp and clean and fresh and it's got that lovely pointy shape. It doesn't leave you feeling sugary. It's bright, clean. We stopped the fermentation a little early with this wine to capture that residual, and obviously it has a correspondingly lower alcohol. So this one, the 23, is about 8.5%, I think, percent alcohol.
Where are the vines for this one? That's
actually, believe it or not, the very light pressings from the Braemore vineyard.
Oh, okay.
So the free run, we take off to bottle as Braemore, and then the very, very low pressure next bit we'll put towards the 6 Degrees. So it's such low pressure, you're not really taking any astringency or phenolics from the skins anyway. But even if there is or was, to my mind, it would just be adding some sort of textural complexity to the wine in underneath that residual sweetness.
That's delicious, right? That one.
Yeah, we had a German Riesling just last week.
Yeah, Spatley's, the JJ Prum ones.
Righto. Yeah, well, Spatley's is a slightly higher level of sweetness. So this one, it's interesting because it's so beautifully balanced. When people taste the wine and they ask me what's the residual on that wine, I throw it back to them and say, well, you tell me. And 90% of people go between 10 and 20 grams per litre.
Yeah.
Whereas in actual fact, we've kind of kept at the same level all these years. It's 35 grams. So the level of sweetness actually belies the taste of the wine because that acidity just cuts through so beautifully.
How would this age as well?
Interesting you might say that. Look, it's really designed to be drunk and enjoyed in the freshness and vibrance of its youth. But I just I can't remember where we found them. In fact, I've got them down there. We'll open one at the end of this.
Yeah.
We found 3 or 4 cases of this wine from 2017, and it's really interesting.
Wow.
It's really good.
Wow.
It's really, really good. Yeah.
I love how you say you found one, like it was you'd forgotten about that at some point. Is that what happened?
They were in a corner somewhere or packed amongst some other bits and pieces and were unpacked and it's like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's nice to have those little surprises every now and then.
Well, this is to me has also been a surprise because I haven't tasted an off-dry Semillon before and I think there needs to be more of it that we're having.
Interesting you might say that because we were kind of the first to have a crack at this style back in 2008. And now if you travel around the Hunter, I imagine there would be 20 or 30 producers doing a similar style.
They'll copied you then.
Trendsetter, pioneer,
the ultimate form of flattery, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. It's so we might also, while we're tasting, continue on with the questions. And I wanted to get your view on Hunter Valley and what makes it special. Because looking at what you're wearing, Sydney Swans, you're a devoted Sydney Swans fan. And I'm curious, as a Sydney sider, I don't think I've given enough love to Hunter Valley. I think I've been looking elsewhere.
Shame on you.
Yes. And I said that myself. I feel a bit ashamed in regards to it. And probably for me, I need to get a better clarity on what makes Hunter Valley special. Now, you've decided to stay here, having been born and raised in McLaren Vale, and there's something special about this place. You might have already touched on it. For everyone listening, what makes Hunter Valley special to you?
Okay, from just to start with, for Sydney siders, we're so close. You know, we're literally, depending where you are, it's pretty well freeway all the way here these days, so you can get door to door from Sydney to the Hunter Valley and back 2 hours.
2 hours
at max each way. So it's really easy to come up here for a weekend or even midweek. In terms of what I love about the Hunter Valley is, and what made me fall in love with the Hunter Valley, are the very uniquely regional styles that we produce here. And that's, again, harking back to sort of the way I started my brand, just to focus on the signature varieties, is very much about Semillon and Shiraz. Semillon is unique to the world of wine, the style we produce here, but also our style of Shiraz is quite unique to the Hunter Valley as well. So McLaren Vale boy, the home of South Australian Shiraz, the home of big sort of high octane, full-bodied, fleshy Shiraz. Hunter Valley, our style is quite proudly more in that medium-bodied spectrum. And particularly the modern contemporary style of Hunter Valley Shiraz is very much about beautiful, aromatic, vibrant red and blue fruits, very much medium-bodied, and obviously between vintages it's a spectrum. Some years are sort of in the fuller end of that medium-bodied spectrum. Some years are sort of middle or in the lighter end, but medium-bodied. And that beautiful savoury texture, that almost, we touched on it before we started here, almost sort of European tannin structure and savoury texture. And interestingly, McLaren Vale boy, Hunter Shiraz stylistically, I would say is closer to the Rhone Valley than it is the Barossa Valley or McLaren Vale. That's our style. So beautifully food-friendly styles, very approachable as young wines, but the best examples obviously also have this remarkable longevity. So, Semillon Shiraz aren't the be-all and end-all. There's obviously there's some fantastic, particularly over the last 10 years, examples of world-class Chardonnay being produced in the Hunter and Tyrrell's and Lakes Folly and Liz Silkman, particularly. They're doing absolutely amazing things with Chardonnay. And then there's Verdelho. It's a significant variety here in the Hunter, and particularly over the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a lot of other varieties produced as well. So one thing that makes all these wines unique is this unique combination between our climate and our ancient soils, and obviously some of the really old vineyard stock that we have in the ground, that come together to combine to produce, certainly in the best examples, absolutely world-class wines from this beautiful region. It's quite beautiful as well. One last thing about the Hunter I love, it's just a great community. It's it's interesting. Some of my some of my best mates are also my competitors.
Yeah.
You know, and so we're all pretty tight. If something breaks down, you just have to make a phone call, and we're all out here to help each other. And I think part of that is, I think. Well, we're all decent people for a start, but I think we all have the same cause in mind, and I think collectively our message is much stronger than everyone sort of out individually, sort of with their own messages.
Yeah.
And even in Sydney, you're both in Sydney, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So to be brutally honest, it'd be awesome to get a bit more love from the Sydney market.
Yes.
I'm sure you go to a lot of restaurants, and sometimes you might struggle to see a single Hunter wine or even a single one from New South Wales, and that's changing. It's definitely getting better, and particularly I think as restaurants are looking more closely at sustainability and food miles and local produce.
Right.
There certainly is a renewed interest and focus on wines from New South Wales and the Hunter, but we've got a long way to go.
Yeah,
it'd be nice to think that an international tourist coming into Sydney will be able to taste some local wines in pretty well every single restaurant they go to in Sydney. So we're not there yet. We're working on it. It's certainly getting better, but we've got a bit of a way to go.
What needs to crack that? Is it purely more marketing budget, which is already hard? Is that the secret to it? What do you think needs to change?
Look, it's interesting. If you go to Adelaide, the restaurants are one list, a chock block full of, Hunter Valley, Barossa Valley, Clare, Coonawarra, Langhorne Creek, Clare Valley, wherever. Same in Melbourne, those restaurants stock, they're very parochial.
Yeah.
Whereas Sydney, I don't know, being a more sort of international city, sort of further afield, and it's really competitive too. I mean, there's great wines made throughout the whole of Australia, let alone all the imports that come into Australia from the rest of the world. So it's a very competitive space, and obviously each wine list only has a certain number of spaces there, so it is quite competitive. What needs to happen? I don't know. I think the hospitality gatekeepers just need to probably have a bit of a closer look at what's going on in their own backyard. Sometimes perhaps you don't really look that closely at what's happening just around you. Yeah. And certainly the quality of wines coming out of the Hunter and a lot of other regions in New South Wales has never been higher. So there's got to be a space in every list for a few Hunter or New South Wales wines. They've just got to invest in exploring what's going on here. We go to Sydney as much as we can, and we invite trade to come up here and experience the Hunter firsthand. So as I say, it's definitely improving, but we just got to keep working at it.
Yeah, I said to Jason, I guess for Hunter Valley when I was here, like in early 2000s out of uni, and it felt like the Hunter Valley was all about Shirazes and big alcoholic type of wines. And now, because you are now creating better wines, I feel like you still need to kind of push that kind of identity around Hunter, and I guess try and champion Semillon as well, because I think in other regions it's always about Shiraz or the international variety, Chardonnay. I feel like Semillon is, even though it's very iconic to Hunter, we need to kind of push it a bit more in terms of what it's good for, why it's good to drink as well, and kind of make it cool on trend.
You're absolutely right. I guess the hard thing about Semillon is that, like, quite frankly, it is a bit of an enthusiast wine because, particularly as a young wine, it doesn't have like the aromatic lift and vibrancy of something, slightly more obvious varieties, and obviously Sauvignon Blanc springs to mind. But even Riesling has got these sort of aromatic floral characters amongst their citrusy fruit, whereas Hunter Semillon is quite reserved. It's very pure and precise and really tight citrus characters. So it's not an obvious style. Structurally, certainly internally, wine enthusiasts really get it because, and we can look at this Braemore Semillon next. For wines like Braemore and top-end young Hunter Semillon to have that level of intensity and concentration for such, arguably one of the most delicate styles in the world is something to behold.
Yeah.
And that's what separates wines like this from the pack. I think one of the other problems with Semillon too is people might be a little uncomfortable. Do we call it Semillon or do we call it Semillon?
Yeah.
Or Sem.
Or Sem, that's easy. And also, we're not sure if we're supposed to drink as a young wine or we've heard, Hunter Semillon has this aging capacity. Should we be waiting? And I don't know, we just need more education in that space, I guess. But I certainly encourage people to explore young Hunter Semillon, particularly over the last 10, 15 years. I think we've probably, as a region, changed the style a little bit, going from really lean, austere, earlier picked styles that really don't give you a hell of a lot, and those styles probably do need that bottle age, to just trying to hang in the vineyard a little bit longer and just produce a little bit of extra ripeness, a little more generosity, a little more approachability as young wine. And certainly those wines, we're seeing people really migrate to Hunter Semillon through just that tweak in style, particularly as young wines.
That's probably a good segue to try the next wine, as you've mentioned, which I'll also hold up to the screen here. So if you want to tell us a bit about this wine, the Braemore Semillon 2023.
Yeah, this is our flagship single vineyard Semillon from the Braemore vineyard, which, as I mentioned earlier, sits pretty much right in the middle of this sort of deep sandy loam, alluvial ancient watercourse that's been silted up over the last 260 million years or so. It's perfect Semillon country. The vineyard was planted in 69, so just over 50 years old now. And every year, this vineyard produces our top Semillon. And what I love about this vineyard is every year it does have this extra level of intensity and concentration, and particularly on the palate. And, for Hunter Semillon, as I say, you're kind of expecting something fairly lean and a line of acidity, but this wine always has that energy on the palate. It's kind of like a tightly coiled spring of intense energy within the wine. It's, as I say, it's probably not what you expect generally out of young Hunter Semillon, but it just, you taste the wine and your mind will wander off and you'll come back to it a couple of minutes later and you've still got that lingering flavour in your mouth. And it's that, it's that tightly coiled spring, that energy within Hunter Semillon from vineyards like this that also provide the longevity, the cellaring potential, because that spring slowly unwinds over the years to reveal these glorious bottle-aged characters with a few years rest down the track. So, that's young Hunter Semillon, and boys, just what are you going to be drinking that with?
I still think seafood, but
absolutely.
I'm just thinking, but because it feels like it's got that power there as well. So I feel like it needs something something that can kind of match it.
It does have that intensity too, but still going right down through the middle of it is that acidity. Yeah. So my go-to with a young wine like that is personally is like sashimi. Just bring it on. Just some beautiful fresh sashimi.
Yeah. And to your point about kind of anything that needs a squeeze of lemon, it's like kind of like pan-fried sardines with that kind of squeeze of lemon over the top.
Yeah.
Has that kind of the crust of the kind of paprika and the kind of breadcrumbs on it. And then with that, it's going to, I think, smashable.
Just sort of cuts through it all.
With that oiliness of the kind of sardines or the mackerel as well, it's going to go well.
Yeah. Delish.
I had a Semillon from Hunter probably more than 10 years ago. And to your point about how the styles may have changed, I don't know if it was then, but my memory of it was exactly what you said. It was really austere and I'd say one-dimensional is kind of the way. And that is not that.
No.
And that was from a big producer from the area. But wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. And that's a fair call. Those traditional styles. So, to me, there's a difference between traditional and classic. To me, the traditional styles are those really lean, austere, almost slightly lemony water wines and searing acidity. And it's like they don't really give you much to on wine, but maybe, with some time in the bottle, they'll develop some amazing characters, not particularly interesting as young wines. Wines like this we describe as classic. So they are, still unwooded, and they're all about freshness, vibrancy, varietal purity, but there's a bit more ripeness, a bit more interest and intensity going on that actually makes them quite delicious as young wines, and interesting without compromising any of the potential longevity that they have in the bottle.
It's interesting how, because that one tasting that I had actually put me off wanting to explore Semillon. Like the first varietal of that, I've tried it. I don't like that. I'm not going to delve any further.
Yeah.
It's interesting how that journey occurs.
Yeah, and there's been a change in style of our Shiraz too. And if you think about the old style, and we'll get onto that later, but the old-fashioned style of Hunter Shiraz and the more modern contemporary style of chalk and cheese.
Yeah,
and I think it's really up to us now to get that message out there. To wine drinkers, no matter where you are in a restaurant or buying wine for yourself for home, to get that message across, to come back and explore these newer, more contemporary styles, because once you've got a glass in front of you, you'll be hooked. What's not to love?
Yeah. To my point before around Hunter identity, do you think there's a place where you talk about Braemore, you call it the kind of Grand Cru area, kind of calling that Braemore or Hermitage type of area, and give that identity rather than classifying Semillon and Semillon, which means that we can get lost in the one-dimensional Semillons to the actually spectacular Semillons over here?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I think that comes down to subregions.
Yeah,
and clearly we do have some GI subregions here in the Hunter. Piccolbin is one, which is where Braemore sits in Piccolbin. Breakford is another. We have some other subregions that aren't actually officially recognised, like Mount View, Belford, Lovedale. The trouble is that some of the Semillons, the majority of the Semillons from those subregions, really aren't distinctively different enough to be able to definitively say, that's a Mount View Semillon, or that's a Belford Semillon. I think the way that we've gone as a region is a little more detailed than that, and it's coming down to single vineyards. So you will know that Braemore is, one of your Grand Cru Semillons, or Mount Pleasant Lovedale, or Tyrrell's Vat 1, which is not a single vineyard, but it's pretty much the same vineyards each year, and they have the pedigree, probably more so than what we need for one sub-regional area to be more highly regarded than another, because these vineyards are spread across a number of different subregions. So does that make sense?
That makes sense, yeah.
It's more getting to know the pedigree vineyards, or the pedigree labels within the Hunter Valley, are probably just as, if not important than, exactly where they're grown.
Yeah, exactly.
But you will find a consistent theme across most of these wines is that majority of them are grown on these lighter sandy loam alluvial flats.
I need to ask more questions about that sandy loam, because I need things really spelled out for me. But before we do that, I think let's move on to the next one, which is the Braemore Semillon 2017 vintage.
Yeah, so each vintage I put away as much as I can, in round figures, 250, 300 dozen each year. And we cellar it ourselves, actually right here in this room. You'll be pleased that we've turned the air conditioner on for this interview, because this room that has all our back vintage Braemores and Kiss, as well as all our Shiraz in oak, sits at a constant 15 degrees all year round. Look, the reason I do this is because, let's face it, the style that the Hunter Valley is best known for all around the world are our bottle-aged Hunter Semillons, because it is something so unique. And when we think of cellaring, generally, we'll sort of, first thought would come into our mind would be a red. But Hunter Semillon is one of these unique white varietals around the world that does have the capacity to cellar quite gracefully, arguably, depending on vintage, for a very, very long time. And so, unfortunately, not many people buy wine to cellar. these days, and it's just the sign of the times. 95% of wine purchased in retail is consumed in 24 hours, and it's a commitment. You've got to have the right space. It's got to be consistent and coolish. You've got to you've got to invest in wine that has the capacity to age, and then you've got to have the willpower to keep your mitts off it. So generally people aren't buying wine to cellar it. So as a relatively serious producer of Hunter Valley Semillon, I almost feel morally obliged to cellar our flagship Braemore Semillon myself. So we put away a few hundred cases each year. We re-release it with 6 years or 6.5 years by the time it comes out. It's released, each vintage released on the first day of spring. So 1st September, this was released 1st September last year. And over those 6 years, it has transformed into something that is just completely, almost non-discernible from where it started, apart from the fact that it is still very much citrus-based, but it's rather than sort of pure, lemon and lime zest. Here we've got some lemongrass and lemon curd, but probably more to the front is this amazing toasty complexity that we see in great bottle-aged Hunter Semillon. It's almost like a lightly browned piece of toast has popped up out of the toaster, and you've just put a little swipe of butter over it, some like beeswaxy characters, and it's just got a lot going on. If we're talking about young Hunter Semillon perhaps being a little on the lean side, these wines certainly have a lot going on. But still amazingly fresh and vibrant. That line of acidity on the palate, it has not diminished between when it was first bottled and now. It's still there, but it's probably not quite as prominent because there's a lot more going on around it. But it's still that line of acidity is still very important to the style. And you'll see, like,
the colour.
Obviously, this 2017 is 7 years old now. And we will expect to see a little extra development in colour, but, a lot of 6, 7, 8-year-old Chardonnays, for example, will be quite deep and, or golden by now. And this is still so beautifully bright and wonderful. And, a great quality cue for young but particularly bottle-aged Hunter Semillons. If you still see that beautiful, almost electric green like speck, that little hue in bottle-aged Hunter Semillon, that's like a marker that you're potentially looking at something pretty good. They don't have that sort of dullish yellow. They're still bright and got that electric green hue. We love them. And look, I release it at 6 years of age. If you love young Hunter Semillon, you really need to drink it in the first couple of years. If you prefer the bottle-aged versions, you need to wait for at least 5 or 6 years because it takes that long for these bottle-aged toasty complexities to start to emerge. In the middle area there, it can be a little sort of awkward, neither freshness of fruit nor bottle-aged complexity. Not bad, but not as interesting as the two extremes. So 6 years, it's a good time. Braemore has emerged with these lovely toasty characters, and then it's up to our customers to decide whether they take it home and drink it that night, or they put it away for another 5, 10, 15 plus years, because that wine will still be absolutely singing in another 10 or 15 years' time.
Like I had it and I just thought that is a serious wine. Like I had it, you're right, that kind of honeyed wax with a mix of, the lime curd. I don't know, even a bit of floralness, but a bit of ash to it as well, which is that kind of like toasted toast kind of flavour. But the thing that kind of strikes me is that length on it. Like a minute after it, it's still hanging there.
It has some amazing intensity, doesn't it? Yeah. And it's interesting. You'd be forgiven if you're unfamiliar with the style of bottle-aged Hunter Semillon. You'd be forgiven for thinking that one's seen some barrel at some stage, because of that, some like maturation and fermentation. That toastiness is almost as though, hang on, is there seen some oak at some stage? But of course it hasn't. That wine, when it was bottled in 2017, didn't look dissimilar to how the 23 looks today. It's just this very unique thing that happens with the Hunter Semillon, and that's why it's so highly regarded all over the world.
Yeah. The transformation over 6 to 7 years is so significant in comparison to other varieties.
It's like a caterpillar, right?
Good example. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good example.
Yep.
And we want to move on to the Shiraz. Before we do that, you've mentioned the sandy flats quite often, And I'm trying to understand, why are the sandy flats so good for growing great Semillon?
Number of reasons. One is because they're very well drained soil, and Semillon does not like having wet feet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
It just doesn't like clogged, waterlogged soil. So very well soiled. That Braemore, for example, if we got 2 inches of rain today, we could still get a tractor through there tomorrow. Whereas on a lot of soils, like the soil that this Shiraz is coming from, you're probably 2 or 3 days away with some sunshine and some warmth before we can get a tractor, because it's clay and slippery. Yeah. So that's number one. They're really quite friable soils. So because they're well drained and they don't retain much water in the top soil, the roots can get quite deep to keep to go and chase that water, because it's quite easy to get through this quite open soil compared to, like, again, a more sort of heavier clay-based soil. And other smaller things like not so much these days, because we're not cultivating the vineyards quite as much as perhaps they were 40 years ago. There's more of a sort of a mid-row sward of plantings or even weeds. But back in the early days, that I think that sort of, particularly in the more challenging seasons, the reflection of the light and the sun off that lighter coloured soil back up into the canopy probably assisted with some of the ripening as well.
Right.
So, and look, I'm sure there's some other reasons as well, but
those are good reasons.
The primary reasons, I guess. Yeah.
Explain it.
I think one part of it is, you say, respect the vineyard, but another part is also the winemaker as well, right? You won Winemaker of the Year 2023 and two other times, right? I think 14 and 08 as well, right?
You've done your research.
How does, I guess, what makes a great winemaker, especially around Semillon?
I mean, obviously, the proof is in the bottle at the end of the day. As I said at the start, I've been very fortunate to have access to some vineyards that produce some of the best quality fruit in the Hunter. In terms of the winery, what we do in the winery, if you had to sort of drill it down to one thing, I think it's attention to detail. Yeah, and that applies to any occupation. It applies to what you guys do. Yeah. It applies to what a lawyer does. It applies to what a butcher does. Yeah. It applies to any profession or occupation is attention to detail. Certainly in the winery, there's so many details that you need to be aware of. So it's it's not the easiest thing to apply that attention to everything, but the more attention you can apply to all those little details, I've got on one of the tanks out here, the little 1%ers make a big difference. Yeah, and I kind of like that. It's that it all relates to that attention to detail thing. And it's experimentation. You don't start a brand and instantly overnight have success. We've been at this. So I kind of feel like I think a lot of people look at us and think, we're a bit of an overnight success. We've been going now for over 25 years. So, it takes time, and you'll love what you're doing as well.
I think on the tanks you had two other things. It is what it is.
Yeah,
and teamwork makes the dream work.
Yeah, so the interns or the casual help we had through vintage coming in and getting the right someone on the tank. The is what it is was that was Georgie who came and helped us out with the 2020 vintage, which was a non-vintage because you may remember all the mega bushfires west of here, Gosford's Mountain. It basically all the smoke that blew in ruined 60-80% of the harvest. So it is what it is. Not much we can do about it. And the teamwork makes the dream work. I think that was Joe Hollyman. Yeah. Joe, he's Tasmanian up in the Tamar in Tassie. He never comes up for a whole vintage. He just sort of swings in, swings out, and sort of creates a bit of havoc, and then takes off again. And I'm pretty sure that was his. But it's nice having those little quotes.
No, that's good. No, that's very good.
Yeah. I think about attention to detail, but also the word that comes to mind is focus. Like for you to choose, I'm only going to go and do Semillon and Shiraz. There's something in the way you've thought about it is you don't spread yourself everywhere and do too many things at once. Focus is what's going to bring out the best outcomes. Where did attention to detail and focus come from? Has it always been part of your personality? Did you learn it? What happened?
The focus on just these two signature varieties, that was a decision I made very much like from the start of getting my own brand off the ground. And I guess it was based on rather than trying to produce everything for everyone, like a lot of people do, and good on them too, because it widens up your your market appeal if you're ticking a whole lot more boxes. I couldn't be bothered doing that. I really wanted to be a little more niche and focused, to use your word. And obviously the key to the success of that approach was making wines that at some stage down the track will be regarded as sort of in the top level of the valley. And I knew that because I could be focusing on Semillon Shiraz till the cows come home, but making mediocre wines, and no one would care. So they had to be examples of the very best wines produced in the region. And that's why I realised from the very early stage it was critical for me to make sure that I secured access to some of the best quality fruit, because I couldn't do it just with my winemaking skill. I needed the high quality grapes to get there. And we've stuck to our guns over the years. We are, I guess, our market is a little niche. But I do love the fact that people that want to take deep dive into Hunter Semillon Shiraz, we're pretty much always on their list.
Have you ever been tempted with like Chardonnay or something like that, or?
Look, I used to do a lot of contract winemaking.
Yeah.
When my own brand was tiny, I couldn't live just off the selling of a few hundred cases. So I prostituted my services out to other people and made wine for a number of other growers around the area and a bit of consultancy here and there. So I've had the opportunity to produce all different varieties and styles for those other guys. Look, we have diversified a little bit. I mean, our core focus is very much on those two varieties, but in 22 was the first vintage we did a Semillon Chardonnay blend, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So, classic Hunter Sem blended with a little bit of Chardonnay that's fermented in some brand new French oak for about 3 months. That's a pretty cool wine. And next month we've got our first Shiraz Pinot blend in the deck, Deja Vu, from the 2023 vintage. And that's pretty cool too. So, I'm not strict. I will only ever do Semillon Chardonnay, but, those wines are obviously the dominant variety is Semillon and Shiraz, I should say. But, we'll explore all options. But, our core focus will always remain while my feet point to the ground anyway.
And we do want to talk about the future of the wines here. But before we get to that, let's try the Kiss Shiraz 2022 vintage. So this is the first Shiraz we're going to try. And if you could talk us through the story of this one.
So I really wanted to focus on the stylistic diversity that we try to achieve in the range. So it made sense to do 3 whites, but the tasting wouldn't be complete without a Shiraz at the end. And I thought, well, we might as well go straight to the top shelf. So Kiss is our flagship single vineyard Shiraz. It comes from Piccolben Estate Vineyard, which is kind of very much central Piccolben. Purely coincidentally, the vines were planted the same year as Braemore, 69. So they're both a bit over 50 years old now. And this is just a beautiful example of contemporary Hunter Valley Shiraz. So it's all about that aromatic vibrancy, red and blue fruits. There's obviously some beautiful interwoven, sexy French oak maturation, complexity sitting there amongst the fruit. But what I love about this wine is, and it's 22 vintage. This is due for release. All our 22 reds are coming out on the 18th of May. So really close, and I'm pretty excited to see these wines hit the shelves. What I love about wines like this, and not just this wine, but the top shelf examples of Hunter Valley Shiraz, is that wines like these really demonstrate that you can have this beautiful intensity and concentration within a medium weight frame. So it's not all about sheer weight and power. It's more about internal structural complexity and beauty. And that's what wines like this and others from around here have in spades. And that's what made me fall in love with Hunter Valley Shiraz.
Yeah.
It's stylistically poles apart from McLaren Vale or South Australia. But the best examples are equally as world-class. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's juicy, very big. I think it's fruit, but it's restrained fruit. But then the kind of kiss of the oak is really nice. The kind of comes through. Yeah. And for me, it feels like it's kind of the acidity, kind of makes it really salivate. the mouth, almost like a white kind of.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think the acidity in that we achieve with Hunter Valley Shiraz is just as important in our reds as it is in our Semillons. And they're beautiful, savoury texture. You know, ones like this, it's 22, it's not even released yet, or nearly, but, you know, you can take that home and drink it tonight. It's delicious. But you can also see sort of that it's a little introverted, sort of you're looking inward structurally this wine. You can see that it's got some wonderful long-term evolution ahead of it as well. And, you know, we touched earlier on, you know, the evolution of styles in the Hunter Valley. I think it's fair to say that, you know, 20, 30 years ago, the style of Shiraz for the Hunter is very different to what you're seeing now. And, you know, we've gone through, you know, you were talking about the early noughties. Well, that was in the Robert Parker Jr. days. And I'm as guilty as anyone. I was trying to produce the biggest Hunter Shiraz I could. And the wines were, you know, I guess impressive, but nowhere near as beautiful as these more restrained wines that have more respect for the vineyard and what the Hunter Valley style is. But also, you know, if you go back further in the early noughties, I think it's fair to say that a lot of Hunter Reds, Shiraz were kind of, how shall I put it, a little rustic in their nature. You know, there's lots of reasons for that, but certainly over the last 20 years, the whole region has had a real renewed focus on, you know, hygiene and just a lot of the things we do in the winery to produce this style, which I would describe as a much more, you know, modern, contemporary style of Hunter Valley Shiraz. So still all the regional hallmarks, medium-bodied, savoury, beautiful, bright fruit without the distractions of some of those rustic characters that we used to see.
Well, sometimes we use the term elegant. It's got this kind of elegant Shiraz to it.
Yeah. And, you know, that's, I guess, why back in the early days they used to refer to Hunter Shiraz as Hunter River Burgundy. You know, Burgundy obviously being Pinot, but, you know, it is, you know, it's very much this sort of lighter, the medium-bodied style. And
how do we achieve that in the Hunter? Because I always think about this kind of like lighter kind of reds, more for cool climate. Are we cool climate here or?
No, not by any stretch. Again, it's just a combination of our slightly warmer climate and these ancient soils, and a lot of them are pretty tough soils, and I think to a certain extent that the actual vine stock that we have in the ground, which are they unique to the Hunter Valley? Maybe, particularly some of these old, you know, particularly old vineyards. Tyrrell's have got some significant acreage of vines that are well over 100 years old. So, you know, some of the oldest plantings of Shiraz in the world. So a lot of, and I know for a fact, I don't know where it came from, but when this vineyard was planted in 69, it was planted from taking cuttings from another older vineyard in the Hunter Valley. So that's kind of been passed down the line to a certain extent. And possibly the vineyard, the cuttings that this vineyard was planted to was planted from cuttings from another vineyard. So it's kind of all passed down the line. So that's not to say if you took some cuttings from a Barossa vineyard and brought them up here, you'd make a Barossa style. It's much more than just the stock of the vine stock in the ground. But certainly our soils and our climate play a big part in that. And we have a relatively condensed growing season compared to some other regions. And all these things add up. The sum of everything adds up to this beautiful world-class, medium-bodied Hunter Valley Shiraz.
You referenced Burgundy. You got the Côte d'Or vineyard as well, right? Is that the kind of reference to Burgundy as well?
Well, that's actually a very cheeky historic name for a particular vineyard that was planted by the Wilkinson family back in the 1860s. The original vines long gone, but it was replanted in 71. But the cheeky name of the vineyard still remains, and it was originally named Côte d'Or, and obviously that is very much a reference to Hunter River Burgundy. There's always been this this reference to sort of Burgundy and Pinot Noir, probably not the variety, but more the style, the weight of the wine compared with the variety. You know, if we go back to the 70s, no one labelled their wines as varietals. There was, you know, Claret and Burgundy and Hock and even Riesling was more of a style than a variety. It's only since probably the 80s really that varietal labelling has really taken off.
Trent, did you know prior to this tasting what a Hunter Valley Shiraz was?
I thought I knew.
Based on 10 years ago or
10 years
whatever.
ago, yeah, until now trying some of these Hunter Valley Shirazes.
Yeah.
I dare to say people kind of hate the term, that kind of more kind of Shiraz style as well, the more kind of elegant style of Shiraz.
Yeah, I think that's a fair call.
Yeah.
I don't call, and not many people call them Syrah around here.
Yeah.
Some will because it is relevant. Because when people think Syrah, they do think that sort of more medium body, spicy. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Rightly or wrongly, I kind of feel Syrah is more reserved for Shiraz from cooler climate.
Yeah.
It's relevant to the style we're producing, but I prefer Shiraz, mate.
Yeah, Shiraz.
The Australian identity.
Shiraz.
Look, I think that I think there's a role to play, and we've got a role to play in kind of getting the message out about what a Hunter Valley Shiraz identity is. And I just, as a consumer, and I don't represent everyone out there, I just feel like it's not really clear. But you come here and taste it and you're like, hold on, that's got a clear identity.
Special. Yeah.
Absolutely.
In comparison to all of the other areas out there, there's got to be a better focus on that. But that's just my observation. We are at the tail end of this. Did you have any last questions before we wind it up?
It's probably more talking about the future of Thomas wines. You know, you've done 27 years now. A lot of those 1% each year. Maybe that's 27%. I know.
Still a long way to go.
What's next? You know, what is the next kind of 1% that you're going to add to it?
Well, we opened our cellar door just up the road here from the winery a few years ago.
Yeah.
So that has been and will continue to be a focus with our business.
Yeah.
To always provide a beautiful, welcoming experience for visitors to the Hunter Valley. And one thing I do love about the fact that we've chosen this path with these two varieties is it's a really interesting tasting because you don't come in and just taste one wine and then move on to the next. We do little flights so that people get an opportunity to do the compare and contrast and really delve into what ticks the box with their own personal taste and palate. You know, everyone has different tastes. So that's a continued focus of what we're trying to achieve. You know, looking over the next 10 or 20 years, fortunate, I've actually got, we spoke earlier, like trying to choose your favourite child. I actually have 4 sons. 3 of them a bit older, and my eldest son, Dan, who you met just a little bit earlier, has been now working with me for coming up to 4 years, I think. So sooner or later, he's going to have the knowledge and the experience and the capacity to kick his old man out into the rhubarb patch and start making some decisions, be allowed to make some decisions on his own. And I find that quite exciting. You know, it's the wine business always needs new energy. And I think he's already providing some really well-needed energy and focus on various aspects of the business. Sustainability, and you know, like I am all for it, but like Dan is perfectly positioned to really drive that part of the business, and we are very much on board with getting sustainability credentials to where they need to be, because not only is it the right thing to do, but it's also very smart business sense, because it makes your business better. It makes potentially make our wines better. So that's a focus. In terms of wines, you know, we've got a fairly expansive range now of wines labels within these two varieties, but I'm not adverse to to bringing new wines out, maybe, you know, on an ad hoc or regular basis. I don't know. To me, like the Deja Vu Shiraz Pinot, like that's something that really interests me, and it's new and exciting, and it's most importantly, it offers a stylistic nuance to our whole offering. The last thing we want to do is be putting ones in a bottle that all kind of look the same. It's really important to have that stylistic diversity. So, you know, we're 27 years young. There's lots of opportunities out there, and between myself and Dan and who knows who else, I've got a few other sons. We've just probably got to grow a little bit before there's room for like my vineyard focus son Remy to come back in. But, you know, I'm excited for the future and just living each day to the fullest and enjoying life.
And so that probably takes us to the end of the interview. Any last messages for viewers or listeners? Anything that you want to share about Thomas Wines, Hunter, anything?
Putting my regional cap on, take my Swans cap off, put my Hunter Valley cap on. I'd love people to do is, if you haven't ever tried a wine from the Hunter Valley, seek them out. If you haven't tried any Hunter Valley wines for a while, go and seek them out, because I think you might be pleasantly surprised with what you see. I do love it when restaurants in Sydney, for example, put one of our Semillons on by the glass, because that's the best opportunity you get to taste, Hunter Semillon, for example. And I know that Hunter Semillon isn't the sexiest category out there in the the international wine market, but I can tell you, once you get a glass in your hand, and the beauty of having wine on by the glass is because some people might not want to commit to a whole bottle, but I'll have a taste of that Hunter Semillon. Once you've got a glass in your hand, you're over the line. You're hooked. You'll love it, and that's great for everyone involved, for you, for me, for everyone involved. So give it a go. Get out there, seek out some Hunter wine, and everyone is doing a fantastic job up here in the moment. I know the other guys you're interviewing while you're up here, just some absolutely wonderful world-class wines, and what's not to love?
Good way to end that. That's very true. We need to visit more. Trent, any last message?
Just shout out to Thomas Wine, shout out to Semillon, and shout out to Shiraz as well. I think try more, learn more.
Drink more, try more, learn more. Absolutely. Look, I want to thank you for your time, Andrew, spending the time taking us through the flight of wines that we've had here. I think the thing to me that's really stood out is Semillon. By trying these different wines, there's a vast variety of difference between them that you can get. So find out what your taste is. Also, other thing that I've got is Hunter's got a great identity for Shiraz, for Semillon, for other wines. I think for Sydney-siders like me, who's a bit embarrassed, need to come back and revisit it. I think maybe there was something that happened previously. I think the place has evolved, and we need to come back and support the Hunter Valley wine region. But thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, guys. It's been fun. Thank you.
As we like to say here, drink more, try more, learn more. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.